Hey, what's up, life designers? Welcome to Intentional Tuesdays. Last week we focused on defining intuition, and I offered two what I hope to be useful paradigm shifts to make intuition more practical and more accessible. Now, if you haven't seen that episode, I recommend you go back and check that out, although you don't need to have watched it in order to get value out of this week's episode. This week, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the subject of intuition, examining the topic both from the evidence for intuition and that intuition exists and that it's useful, but also going to be exploring some of the case against intuition. And then finally, I'm going to offer you a model to help you better understand your own relationship with intuition. So if this sounds interesting to you, then stick with us because we're going to jump right in. Now, it doesn't take much, in my opinion, to make a rational case for the existence of intuition and the value of it. The simplest explanation is that our subconscious mind has access to information that our conscious mind doesn't. And it doesn't take much imagination to prove this to yourself. Simply look at the room that you're sitting in right now for 10 seconds, and then look down and write down everything that you saw. And then after you're finished writing, look up again at the exact same room and notice all of the things that you saw the first time, but that you didn't recognize. Our brains are constantly capturing information. Our eyes, our senses are capturing information, all of our senses, that our brain is not bringing into our conscious awareness, but it is still being recorded to some degree. So once we've accepted the idea that our brains take in and to some extent store a lot more information than we realize, intuition is really, at that point, just a question of signaling. How does the unconscious mind become semi-conscious or even fully conscious via some kind of a signal? Now, this tends to be where the subject gets a little bit murky, maybe even a little bit mysterious. But again, I don't think it needs to be as mysterious as it often is made out. Our bodies are an amazingly efficient machine. Why is it, for example, so difficult to believe that we can experience a physical sensation, a physical manifestation, such as a tension in our stomach, or a sensation of lifting in our heart, or a tension in our shoulders or other muscle areas, that are a reaction to some external stimuli, but the reaction occurred in an unconscious way? Why is it so difficult to believe that our brain can make a decision instantly based on data that our brain has already processed, even though our rational thinking mind is telling us that we need to analyze the situation further? To my mind, it's not difficult at all to accept these types of possibilities. In fact, I would call them probabilities. And there's plenty of research to support the idea that these things are occurring in our lives on a regular basis. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about some of the research later on in the video. Now, when it comes to intuition, there are definitely some real concerns that we need to address. Let's start with the one that probably creates the strongest, what I would call, allergic reaction in the minds of the cynics and the skeptics. Intuition comes with what I will call social baggage. The idea that being intuitive is a romantic idea. It's an attractive idea. It's very cool. It's mysterious. The idea that I personally am intuitive, it makes me feel special. In many ways, this is really, it can be a real ego trip. On top of this, there are a lot of people in the world who are seeking answers to their problems. And the idea that someone out there has the answers or has the ability to tap into some mysterious provider of answers, this idea is very appealing to many people. And it also, of course, opens the door to fraud and to deception. So our willingness, our desire to have things easy really does unfortunately give intuition in many ways a bad name. Now this brings us to the second, what I'll call trap of intuition, which is our biases. Each of us is loaded with biases or hidden preferences. One of the most common biases, and this was really kind of dissected in Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, is our bias towards easy, which is basically to say that given the choice between something that is easy and something that is challenging or hard, most of the time, most of the people will choose the easy path. So here's a little example that you can try for yourself, a little scenario. Let's suppose a bat and a baseball cost together $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now, your intuition may be telling you the ball costs 10 cents. If the bat is $1 more than the ball and they're both $1.10, the ball costs 10 cents. And if you really stop to think about it and do it on paper, you'll realize that the answer is actually 5 cents. The ball costs 5 cents. It's our intuition, our desire to kind of jump to the easy answer that causes most of us to make this mistake at first glance. Now, our biases can wreak havoc on the case for intuition. It's pretty easy to imagine how wishful thinking or confirmation bias could cause us to really fabricate or to misinterpret the signals that we are getting and then to just simply call them intuition. Another example that I particularly enjoy is the idea that our brains are really interested in creating patterns, and we think that we are much better at noticing patterns in the world than we really are. We see patterns everywhere, whether they exist or whether they don't. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that in Las Vegas, when they added the digital history of the roulette wheel, which shows the last 10 spins of the roulette wheel, that it caused the popularity of roulette to skyrocket, because all of a sudden people who were watching the roulette wheel thought that they could see a pattern in the last 10 spins, the last 10 results, and they thought they could beat the game, and therefore were more willing to bet their money. And this is, of course, a complete fallacy, and that generally speaking, the history has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on future outcomes. But our brains tell us that we can see a pattern there, and we are very quick to try to, once again, take the easy route to big money. So there are a lot of reasons that we should tread lightly, move slowly when it comes to really trying to understand and cultivate intuition. When it comes to intuition, personally, I favor a yes and approach, or a middle way. Do I think that there's something incredibly valuable here? Absolutely. Do I think that intuition is an utterly infallible tool? No. In terms of working with your own intuition, the first step is really to check in with yourself and examine your own relationship with intuition. And I want to offer a very simple model that will help you to kind of objectify your relationship with intuition right now. So at one end of the spectrum, we have what I would call the cynic. The cynic is going to hold the position that intuition is generally bunk. The extreme examples of intuition, or things that could be called intuition, like ESP or paranormal types of experiences, are completely made up. Basically, intuition is worthless, and there's nothing that can change your mind. This is what I would call the cynical end of the spectrum. And then from there, I would say you kind of move into what I would call skeptical, which is your position would be highly skeptical of the benefits of intuition. You'd be highly skeptical that intuition is real or value added, or skeptical that people who make claims about their intuition, skeptical that those people are genuine and authentic. From there, you move into what I would call the curious category. You become curious about your own intuition. You're open to the idea that intuition is real, it's important. You have the potential for intuition, but at the same time, that curiosity is tempered by uncertainty. You're perhaps a bit confused about how it works, or you're really interested in learning more, but you're not quite certain. But you are kind of open to the idea. That's what I would call the curious portion of the spectrum. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, opposite the cynic, is what I will call the seeker. Now, the seeker, if you're in this category, you desperately want intuition to be real. You really are longing for intuition to be part of your identity. You are almost grasping at the notion that intuition is something worth paying attention to. And that's what I would call the other end of the extreme on the spectrum. So noticing where you personally fall on this spectrum is crucial. If you are at the cynical end of the spectrum, in the first two categories, but particularly the cynical category, you are very likely closing yourself off to something really useful, to something that the research supports. And yes, there is research out there that supports the idea of intuition. If you're sitting around thinking that there's never been any legitimate research done, the reality is you haven't looked for it. Even when it comes to the existence of paranormal activities such as precognition or extrasensory perception, there is a raft of research that has been done in these areas and continues to be done in these areas on a regular basis. I once heard an interview with a philosopher named Ken Wilber. He was asked by his interview counterpart, if you had $1,000,000 to conduct an experiment that would prove the existence of paranormal phenomena, what would you do? How would you design that experiment? And his answer really struck me as super interesting. He said, I wouldn't conduct an experiment. I would take that $1,000,000 and I would apply it to marketing and public relations, to get people to understand and appreciate and know about the research that has already been done. Because there's so much research that has already been done that the existence of those types of phenomena is virtually irrefutable. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, if you find yourself really seeking, you find yourself deeply wanting intuition to be real, and more specifically, deeply wanting your own intuition to be real, then the chances are you are at risk. You are likely to succumb to some of the traps, some of the biases that I had been mentioning earlier. And similarly, if you believe that your intuition is incredibly strong and totally reliable, that your intuition is infallible, then you are likely to be overusing the tool of intuition. Now, of course, the sweet spot, as I mentioned, is kind of in the middle. If you are curiously skeptical, if you are open to possibilities, then you are probably in the right spot. You'll want to tune in next week to episode 3 of this intuition series, because we're going to be diving deeper into some of the ways that you can really harmonize your intuition in a way that is useful and practical. To my mind, the biggest challenge when it comes to intuition is really harmonizing with the signals that your body is almost certainly giving you already. And just really being able to as I mentioned in the previous week, really being able to listen to this part of you that is an authentic and valid source of information. So that's it for this week's Intentional Tuesday. I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope you're enjoying this series about intuition. If you are, as always, I appreciate you sharing it with a friend or two. And I hope you'll stick around next week for part 3, which will be our final video component of the intuition series. With that, I wish you all the best. I appreciate your time and your attention, and I look forward to our paths crossing again in the hopefully not too distant future. With that, be well and prosperous journey. Take care.